At LensCrafters, we value expertly tailored eye care with a personalized vision experience and offer a wide assortment of designer brands and high-quality lenses. Because everything we do at LensCrafters is for every sight that makes your life special. As a AAA member, you get exclusive offers on all your vision needs at LensCrafters, like 50% off lenses with a complete pair and 30% off sunglasses. Terms apply. Find your new eyewear at a LensCrafters today.
Lately, people from all parts of the world have been looking up at the night sky. A certain celestial phenomenon has been making an unusually vivid splash, and it's got people talking.
Northern Lights was what everyone was talking about last night.
Vivid pinks, purples, and greens lit up the sky across North America and around the world this week.
Hey, good morning. So the Aurora Borealis, or Northern Lights as it's called, having a bit of a moment, aren't they?
If you were lucky enough to catch a glimpse of the Northern Lights from your neck of the woods, then it probably gave you a taste of how magical and unique this solar event truly is. And perhaps it's even left you wanting more. Valerie Stimac is a travel and space tourism writer who grew up in Alaska, and she's the author of Lonely Planets: Stargazing Around the World, A Tour of the Night Sky. You might remember Valerie from a couple of past episodes where we explored the night sky and astrotourism. You can find links to those episodes in the show notes. Today, she's sharing her top tips for planning a trip to experience the Northern Lights. Hello, Valerie, and welcome back to your third time on the show. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks so much for having me back.
We are going to talk about something that's long been on my bucket list, not yet achieved. Well, almost, sort of. Depends if you count the most recent viewings in Florida, which I don't know if I really do because I couldn't tell if it was really the Northern Lights or not. But today we're talking about the Northern Lights.
I'll say when you see them, you'll know you've seen them. If your camera sees them but you can't see them, it's up to you whether you want to count that. But when you see them with your eyes, you will know.
My camera maybe saw them, but I don't know if I did. So I'm not ready to check it off the bucket list yet. What are the Northern Lights and where are the Northern Lights?
Also called the Aurora Borealis. There's the Aurora Borealis in the Northern Hemisphere and the Aurora Australis in the Southern Hemisphere. So you can have Northern Lights and Southern Lights, but they're the exact same phenomena. Basically, it is when particles from the sun interact with our planet's magnetic field, and they enter into the field, and those particles activate atoms of different gases, and that's how we get different colors. You can see them in the northern part of the Northern Hemisphere and the southern part of the Southern Hemisphere, which, if you think about the Southern Hemisphere, means Antarctica mostly, occasionally in some of the southern countries like New Zealand or Australia. But in the Northern Hemisphere, there's a lot more landmass on our planet. So actually, there are lots of places in the Northern Hemisphere that can see the aurora, even in a normal year. So I will say, as we're talking about, seeing the Northern Lights or maybe seeing them in Florida, that is not common. Usually it's the northern destinations. So that would be places like Iceland, Scandinavia, Finland, Russia gets to see the Northern Lights. North America, that would be Canada primarily, Alaska within the United States. Those are the common places. Greenland, Iceland. Yeah, that's kind of the common list of places people might want to go.
Let's talk about why people have been seeing them in unusual places this year, because they have come so far down. I think nobody remembers this ever happening before. So why is this happening, and should we be concerned?
The sun is where it all begins. If the sun is particularly active, there are more particles coming off of the sun and making it their way to our planet and causing the aurora. And the sun is currently at the peak of a cycle. They call them solar cycles, and they take 12 years. This is a particularly strong peak, and it has been strong for more than a year. So there was already great aurora last winter, but everybody knew this winter would be even better. What we didn't expect is that we would still be getting such strong displays of the aurora in May and in early October. That's quite uncommon, especially as far south as many of us are. So basically the way to think of it is, if the sun were a hose, the hose is like fully open right now in terms of the particles that are coming toward our planet. And that means that more particles are making it through the geomagnetic field to interact with atoms in a much wider part of the Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere. So that's why we can see them here where I live in Northeast Ohio. That's why people have seen them or have photographed them as far south as Florida and other southern states. There's just that much solar activity, which is translating into that much aurora activity.
How long do we expect this solar cycle to last?
It's a little bit hard to predict. It is exciting because we're still approaching that peak right now. You know, they say 2025, 2024 was going to be when this solar cycle peaked. And obviously we're experiencing that with the aurora so far. But it's not so fully understood that it's, quote, exact science. It's very well understood, but not perfect. And we can never predict exactly what might happen because the sun is changing all the time, just like our planet's changing all the time.
When people are considering where, if they are going to go see the aurora once in their life and they're thinking about where they're going to do that, I imagine accessibility of the location is probably a big consideration. So of all the destinations, which one would you say is the most accessible?
It depends on where you live. A lot of folks who live on the East Coast or the eastern part of the Midwest and most of the South, eastern part of the South, it may make more sense to go to Europe, which would be Iceland, Norway, or Sweden. They're just closer and cost about the same to visit. If you live in the western part of North America or the United States, usually Alaska is going to make more sense if you live in the West.
When people are planning, there are better times than others. Obviously, we're in a cycle right now where we're seeing it at times and in places that you wouldn't necessarily expect. But what are the optimal times to see the Northern Lights?
In the Northern Hemisphere, aurora season is typically considered, roughly, depending on where you are, how far south you are, to be about late August through late April. But that month on either side, so between August 20th or so and September 20th, which is the autumn equinox in the Northern Hemisphere, and then the other end of that, which is March 20th, the spring equinox to the late part of April, that's sort of the shoulder season of aurora. So it's approaching too light. And the closer you go to the tapering edges, the harder it is to see. Between September 20th, between the equinoxes is the window when the aurora is visible, because it will be dark enough in any of the typical northern destinations at night that if there's aurora visible and the skies are clear, it's dark enough to see them. I typically advise people to look at the shoulder seasons of September and March and the month around those two equinox dates because they tend to be the shoulder seasons in a lot of these destinations. So you can find potentially cheaper flights, cheaper accommodation. If you go in the heart of winter to any of these aurora destinations, they are insanely popular now. And so you're going to be paying a premium to visit during those long, dark nights when the aurora is visible for more.
And now the AAA Travel Minute, presented by LensCrafters. Nobody can predict flight delays, but with a little planning, you can prevent them from derailing your vacation. For instance, if you book a direct flight, there's no connection to miss. Many travelers find that having peace of mind is worth spending a little extra money. Some travelers will even leave from their second closest airport if it means getting a direct flight. When that's not possible and you must connect, be sure to leave plenty of time between legs. And remember, airline search engines can return options with layovers as short as 45 minutes. Yikes! Being savvy about when you fly helps too. According to tracking site FlightAware, the first flight of the day is less likely to be canceled or delayed, and weekdays typically have more alternative flights available should the worst occur. Of course, cancellations and delays are a fact of life, so always be prepared. A AAA travel advisor can help you plan and book your trip and can help make changes if anything goes awry. This AAA Travel Minute was presented by LensCrafters. When we talk about darkness, also we have to think about light pollution. What are some places where it's probably good to fly into, but then get out to actually see the aurora?
If you really want the darkest experience possible, you would want to either rent a car or arrange transportation or arrange a tour to leave the urban area that you have flown into. Because if it's big enough to have a plane, it's bright enough to potentially obscure your view of the aurora.
Which apps do you recommend? Because there's quite a few that people can look at and it can give you a general idea of what's coming. So what do you recommend?
So what I typically check is the Geophysical Institute at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. That is a website I've just been checking for years, and I know how to read their data and make sense of it because each tool has slightly different ways of trying to predict what aurora activity will be. So it's a lot like meteorology in that it's a lot of predictions and people use different data sets to come up with predictions. There's no point having real-time aurora alerts necessarily because often if you're in a place that's dark enough to see the aurora, you can just look out the window and see them, see if they're visible. You may then choose to travel further. I know that a lot of different destinations have their own tool that's sort of localized for them. And that's also going to keep in mind, some of them even integrate that weather data. So you can see it's a strong night, but the clouds are definitely going to be a problem. Or it's clear and it's predicted to be weak, but you still might see them. You kind of got to find the sweet spot for where you're planning to go and try and see them and look for the data from that area.
Tell us about the KP index when it comes to these apps. What are we looking at?
Yeah, so I feel like KP index is probably the most widely known data point that is used to predict the aurora. And so you might even hear about it on like the news if they're talking about aurora activity being visible. Roughly speaking, it's a measure to try and predict the strength of aurora activity based on a bunch of other correlational data points like solar activity and geomagnetic forces in our atmosphere and the way our planet works. So it's a number between 1 and 9. 1 is the lowest, 9 is the highest, and the higher the number, theoretically, the better the aurora might be being the key words there. It's just a predictive piece of data, but it's pretty good. It's not perfect. There's lots of other ones where you can dive really deep into other ways of predicting the aurora. But KP index is one that sort of makes intrinsic sense to a lot of people. And so it's what you'll see most commonly used as an indicator.
Tell us some of the benefits of booking a Northern Lights tour versus just trying to figure it out on your own.
If you're visiting somewhere you've never been, you don't necessarily know where to go to find the best dark areas. And local guides are always going, if they're offering aurora tours, they know that. They have that information. They may even have their own secret spots. So in Alaska, where I've gone on aurora tours, they each have their own area and they kind of all know each other so that everybody gets in position by a certain point in the evening. And then you stay there so that people aren't driving into your area when you're all used to looking at the night sky and your eyes have adjusted to that and, messing with everyone's night vision. The other thing that I love about Aurora tours specifically is that they will give you all of the context and education. Depending on where you're visiting and which tour company you go through, they're certainly going to explain the science to you. But one of my favorite things about the Aurora is that the indigenous peoples of the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere who can see the Northern Lights have stories of the aurora, and some tour companies will give you that additional context. They'll talk about the history of measuring or all the other pieces of science that we're sort of touching on briefly, depending on the guide's level of knowledge and expertise in those different subjects, which is just what makes tours incredible in general, is that extra local context that you get from experiencing something in a place with a person who knows that area and all of the things about your experience.
So say you're going out and it's cold and it's late and it's dark and you're out aurora hunting. What should you bring? What do you prepare? Obviously snacks, obviously, right?
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, yes, if you're a midnight snacker, because you're going to be out at night. So keep that in mind if you're snacking. Angie, you can bring snacks if you need snacks. The main thing that I start with is just ensuring I have enough layers to be warm and comfortable, which is hard if you go far enough north. There's some places, I've been to Alaska, I'm sure Norway, Iceland, get so cold that there's no amount of layers that a normal human owns. You'd be like the kid in A Christmas Story where you can't put your arms down. That's the only way you're going to stay really warm if you're out in negative 30-degree weather. I would start there. In terms of technology, you don't really need much. If you are in a place that's having a strong night of aurora activity, you can view it with your eyes. You can just go out and let your eyes adjust and watch the show. You may want to bring a red flashlight just because that allows you to move around in the dark safely because you can see without affecting your eyes' ability to enjoy the stars and the aurora. And the other thing is a camera. So a lot of people find that having a camera really enhances their experience of the aurora because cameras are so much more sensitive than our human eyes. They really can make the color and the formations that you're seeing pop. And of course, you can record video or photo to have as a souvenir of the experience as well.
That's always nice. And I imagine when you're on a tour, your guide can tell you what settings are useful. There are specific settings to use so you can capture it even on an iPhone.
Most guides are going to know the settings if they're offering photos as part of the tour. So a lot of times it's where you see people get really great photos of them under the aurora. It's that the guide has brought their own camera or they're setting your camera up to be in the right settings so that you can get an incredible photo with the aurora.
Well, and one other thing I think we should mention is because it's such a late night, it's best not to make plans early in the morning. I know I tend to overschedule myself on most trips and try to see as much as I can. And because the aurora is unpredictable, you might try to fit in a bunch of things, but it's better to leave your morning open, right?
Yes, that's actually my number one tip when I'm advising people planning trips to view the aurora in Alaska. It's don't plan anything before 10 a.m. the next morning. And really that's pushing it because when I was there in late February, so not even at the edges we were up till 2, 3, 4 a.m. It can be an exhausting vacation because you're just staying up so late. So you want to give your body that recovery time to sleep, even if it means you're pushing tours. And maybe you're getting up, you're doing lunch and early afternoon and late afternoon experience, and then you're having dinner and waiting for the aurora. So you kind of shift your whole day if that's your number one reason for visiting a place.
Well, and we have to talk about how unpredictable it is, because you can go in this solar cycle and it's supposed to be peak. And what if you get all the way to, the northern tip of the northern hemisphere and maybe you don't see them? How do you manage your expectations on this trip that it may or may not work out?
So the number one, quote, mistake that I think people can make is not planning enough time, enough days and nights. I know my friends at Explore Fairbanks, which is in Alaska, they advise, and I agree with their advice because they studied this data from their destination's perspective. It's probably pretty applicable anywhere in the world, that you need a minimum of 3 nights, ideally 4 or more, however much you have. That's your whole lifetime if you have it, but minimum of 3 nights to try and get one night where the skies are clear and the aurora is active. So that's obviously not a guarantee that you will see them, but that minimum of 3, typically most places find that 1 out of every 3 nights, they're going to get some sort of combination where it's possible to see the aurora. If all you want to see is the aurora, give yourself enough time and you can do that. But there's so many other incredible things to experience that are really unique to these northern climates that are so far north. These northern destinations, I guess I should call them, they're climates and destinations. So you have dog sledding. Like dog sledding is, interestingly, a universal seems sort of a little bit like a pun, but like in the northern destinations where the aurora is visible, almost every culture had some sort of sled transportation. And now you can do dog sledding as an experience. You can, in many places now, you can go interact with reindeer, which is something we don't really think about as an animal that you can have a very safe encounter with, because reindeer are domesticated, but they also are not common in the rest of the world, really. There's hot springs in many of these places, so you can, warm up after you've been out in negative 30-degree weather. There's lots of other activities in every destination where the aurora is visible that you want to make some time for as well, so that even if you don't see the aurora, which knock wood, you will, you still have some other incredible memories to bring home too. So yeah, 3 nights minimum, 4 is even better. Or your whole lifetime if you can afford to make it happen.
Sure. Just like move to northern Finland and see what happens. And, it's fine.
If you really want to see the aurora, I guarantee that if you move to northern Finland, you will eventually see the aurora.
Well, that's the hot tip. Everybody's going to move to northern Finland now, for especially me, because it's so at the top of my bucket list. Let's talk about your favorite Northern Lights experience ever. And you've seen it probably countless times growing up in Alaska. Do you remember one time where it was just like a spiritual experience, or that it just, made you go, wow? Or is that every time?
So the first one was one of the times that I went and viewed the aurora in high school. And I remember this because I couldn't tell you when it was. I could not. But I remember I was in my car and it wasn't yet the middle of winter, because I was able to turn my car engine off, so all the lights went off, and it wasn't cold. So I have a little context. It had to have been probably in the autumn. And I just sat in my car and looked out the windshield and watched the aurora in this dark spot that I knew that was near my high school. That's really one that sort of felt like I was actively engaging with the experience as a young person, instead of just like mom and dad be like, oh, look at that. And you're like, okay, cool. I had chosen to go and view the aurora. And then the other one was in May when it was visible here, across much of the United States. I live in Cleveland, which is a terrible place for someone who loves astronomy because it has a lot of light pollution and it's cloudy. Ohio's one of the cloudiest states in the United States. We did not know that when we moved here. Anyway, I stepped out my front porch in suburban Cleveland and I knew instantly the aurora was out. And I didn't have my camera out. I just knew I could see because I knew what to look for. And I was so excited because I meant if I could see it, so many people could potentially see it, which is this exciting thing for me that like people can have this awareness of the greater forces that work in our solar system and our universe. And that doesn't always happen. Eclipses, as we've talked about in the past, is another one where you really get this perspective of our planet being a planet and interacting with other parts of the solar system and the universe. So the fact that I could step out my front porch and the streetlights are shining on my house and I can still see the aurora, I knew that that was a very, very special communal experience of the aurora. And I was excited to be part of it.
Yeah, I like what you said about the communal experience. I feel that the first time I went to see the eclipse, 2017, 2018, something like that. And it was just powerful. So I'm imagining a similar experience for the aurora. Just the idea that you could see it possibly this far south. Wow. And I didn't have to get on a plane. Thank you, universe. That is pretty special. Valerie Stimac, thank you for joining us. And thank you to our listeners for being with us. If you're planning a trip, be sure to connect with a AAA travel advisor. Check out AAA.com/travel or visit your local branch. This podcast is a production of Auto Club Enterprises. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave us a review. I'm Angie Orth. Thank you for traveling with AAA.